Wie müssen wir ein Unternehmen führen, dass wir Nachhaltigkeit erreichen, dass wir diese Zielgruppe ansprechen und wie sieht dieser Führungsstil aus? Dazu wird sie heute zu uns sprechen und ich bitte Sie um einen ganz herzlichen Applaus für Marga Hoek.
Danke sehr. And that was all of my German for today, I'm afraid. So I'll speak to you in English. I hope that is okay for everyone. And I see some nodding, so that is good. And before I was standing up here, I talked to the moderator and she said, well, be aware that this is a very modest audience. They don't say so much. They actually don't really move. And yeah, just be aware of that. So let's prove her wrong, don't you think? Because I'm talking about a topic that should either excite you, thrill you, make you angry, make you amazed. It should do something with you. So to ensure that we can surprise our moderator, I have one request because I have empty seats here and I have people in the back. And take it from me, if you're bored, you can walk away anyway. I don't mind because then it's not worth your while. But I would, one request in half a minute to have those seats taken. So people from the back come in the front, people from the side here. So I have some people close to me. Running, please. Yeah, that's how I like it. Thank you so much. It's so much nicer to speak to people and to see your faces than to speak to empty chairs. Okay, still some spots here, but it's much better already. Thank you so much. So, I have looked through the program since you are talking and thinking and reflecting on how will work be in the future. And I went through all the programs and all the keynote speakers, and I thought, this is amazing. A lot about digitalization and disruption and all these popular themes. They're very, very important. But I actually saw nobody talking about the world itself. And you know, if we don't have a world, if our economy collapses, there's no space for disruption either. The other way around, if we want to persevere our world, we need disruption and we need digitalization. But then this hour, please bear with me and let's think about what world we are in. You know, I know it's busy here, but it's sometimes good we zoom in way too much. Put that down as note number 1 for HR. Don't zoom in so much because with all these workflows and all these things, zoom out more. Think more about the bigger picture and the longer terms because there are issues that actually deserve that. So I'm going to talk about sustainability with you and maybe in another way than you're used to. And we'll make also the connection with digital because it's actually crucial. First, the world. And I'm not going to depress you, however, I'll possibly depress you a little bit, and I should. Because who of you thinks, and then hands up, you don't have to scream, shout, just hands up, thinks the world is, if you could give it a number, red, yellow, or green? Who thinks the world is green? Who thinks the world is doing well? The assets of the world, the people, the nature, climate, I'll help you a little bit. Who thinks it's green? It's all doing okay. There's no punishments here. Also no personal, not somebody running up to you with a question. You think it's green or are you just waving to somebody? Okay, good. Good. Who thinks it's yellow, orange, whatever you like? It's not okay, but we'll get there. Some of you. Who thinks it's red? Yeah, well, I wish it were orange or yellow. But at the moment, it's red. And we need to realize that we need to grasp the size of the challenges because in your work, it's people business. Most of you, I learned, are in HR, some startups, but all business, your role is crucial to change that ship. So I'll give you a few numbers of the world where we are in now. Imagine with all our welfare, all of our richness around the world, we have a situation still right now where 13% of all people on Earth are chronically hungry. We have 6,000 people a day dying from lack of access to drinking water. Those are huge numbers. At the same time, if you look at how we treat food in the world, and then especially the Western world, of course, then you learn that actually we should be very cautious with our food. We know 13% lack food, so, let's deal with this very cautiously. But on the contrary, 1/3, and by now it's even more than 1/3 of the food that is being produced throughout the world is not being consumed, but either lost or spoiled along the way. 1/3. But that 1/3 of the food that we throw away actually has its footprint because it's being produced, it needs energy to be produced, it needs insecticides, it's going to be traveled around the world to bring it from place A to B and C, etc. So we have the negative impact of that 1/3, but we don't have the food to come along with it. By now, our behavior with food, so not the production but the behavior, has gone absolutely bananas. Because imagine that more people actually by now die because of obesitas than because of lack of food. And that's the situation in the world by now. If we produce, you see the example in the sheet, if we produce, for instance, a t-shirt in the conventional way, so non-sustainable, your regular textile industry, then we use up through the whole supply chain 2,700 liters of water per single t-shirt. And I can go on and on and on about other products, of course. That's insane. But at the same time, it's predicted, because we have still a growing world population, and we also have upcoming economies that change their consumer behavior, that by 2050 we actually need 27% more food and 41% more water. I mean, it's not about the 41 or the 40 or the 42, but you can imagine these are unimaginable numbers. And underneath all this is the huge problem of climate change. Because imagine those things interconnect. Because if we use up so much water, there's going to be less water due to climate change. There's going to be less food due to climate change. There's going to be more poverty due to climate change, etc. So all these challenges actually interact. And if the world were like a company, for instance, you wouldn't invest in it, for sure. You would look at that company and say, how people treat that company, they just take. They don't invest in the right way. They don't keep the value of the assets at the same level, but they decline all the time. So it's more or less a sinking ship. Now, in order not to depress you completely, of course, we as humans are civilized and we can think this through. And we can think through that we need to solve this. And this insight is actually sinking in. And more people, fortunately, realize that we have to change not a little bit, but that we have to change completely to turn this thing around. And if the moral compass doesn't drive you to do that, then money can drive you to do that. Because imagine like obesitas, for instance, which I mentioned, already costs us 2.8% of global GDP. It's just numbers. It's money involved here. Inaction of climate change can lead up to 20% of our global GDP. Because natural disasters, orkan storms, you know them, they're not without any cost. I mean, we don't mark them as such, but it does exist. So this is something that cannot continue. And more business leaders, because I come from the business world, realize we can try to pursue our business model like we did, but if everything collapses, we have no business at all, so we really must change our course. And in 2015, two remarkable things happened in the world. two remarkable things that made us turn that ship and made us choose a course and a common course. And do you know what I'm referring to? Just scream, otherwise, we can't hear. What happened in 2015? Not a history lesson, but... Louder. One more, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Oh, I can talk for 2 hours only about that, but I won't do that. Well, most of you are thinking about it, I'm sure. We had the climate agreement in 2015, and later in that year we adopted in September with 193 countries the Sustainable Development Goals, and I'll show them to you here, 17 goals for the world. Who does not know these goals? Who is seeing it for the first time? Some of you. Who have seen it but think, I'm not sure what it means to me or what to do with it? Quite a number of people, huh? Yeah, so there's a task to sharing this. But I can share with you what it means to me and why I think it's very valuable and why I think it's going to be of influence in your work now, not only in the future. In 2015, we realized where we were at with the challenges that I mentioned to you. And we knew by then that everything is interconnected, but that each party, each person, each professional, each country is trying to solve things on its own and in his own way and in his own interpretation. And in 2017, as a consequence of the millennial goals, their predecessor, we said, okay, these are the 17 things that actually absolutely need to be accomplished, preferably by 2030. And it's to ban real poverty from the world, because there's still millions of people living of under $2 a day. There's many so poor. We absolutely want to ban hunger. We cannot accept in the world anymore that people, and especially children, die from lack of access to food. We want people to be healthy. We want to beat problems like obesity, but also, kids living in bad circumstances. It's in every part of the world. We want everybody to have the basic education. Because, we here are so spoiled. We think, oh gosh, we have to go to school and all that. But imagine you live in Iran. You don't have a school because it's actually been bombed. And nobody dares to teach there anymore. So that's a completely different world. But we want, throughout the world, that kids have basic education, and we want to improve education, because if we improve education, more and more people will be able to work now and in the future. We want to achieve gender equality, and so forth, and so forth. And of course, we have number 13, climate change. Now, the good thing is, and please, if it is of interest to you, there's lots of apps you can just download on your phone with these 17 goals, with the targets underneath, and with the icons. For the first time in history, we have one set of definitions, and that is actually the most important thing. One common set of goals and one language to refer to. And for the business community, this was actually a breakthrough. And they said with many companies, we are going to try to implement these goals in our businesses, not only governments in their countries, not only schools in their education, but also business in their companies. And I think the former UN Secretary General said it very clearly, and this has been repeated by many after that: there is no plan B, because we don't have a planet B. There is one planet, and we have to live and thrive on this planet, and thus we are responsible for it. So after having set those set of goals, we started to measure ourselves. So not only companies did that, because they started to do that, and that is complex but relatively easy, but also continents and countries. And it started with voluntary measurements, and every year more and more countries measure themselves. And Germany, no doubt, is in the top ranking of Europe. So here you see an image of the OECD countries, and I just show that to you to let you see that don't think that because we're in the West that we do perfectly well. So if I talk, I'm from the Netherlands, for instance, and on equality, we have a huge task, because if you look at companies, we have very, very, very little women in the top positions of companies still, which is ridiculous. We should have achieved that by now. But this is how OECD countries look like. So, okay, we do well in some aspects, but we do worse and much worse in others. And one of the things that stands out, of course, is how bad we do on climate change and changing our energy system, which we actually could easily do. And this is how Asia looks, Southeast Asia, but this is how Africa looks. So let's realize that if you have a company, and it's a global company, or it's a company that has production in Asia or Africa, or you have a supply chain throughout the world, this is part of your responsibility. We can't say we're responsible only for our own company. No, because companies work throughout the world and thus influence the whole world, and that can be for the bad and that can be for the better. So, you know, on which side do you want to be? Can be part of the problem, also be part of the solution. So this is how it looks like, so there's a lot to be done. And when that became clear, some business leaders, and I was one of them, said, if this is the case, and this is how big the challenge is, and I sketched you some in the beginning of my speech, then it's not good enough what we have been doing until now, because what we do what we did, you know, we produce the same products, and we do more or less the same way, but we try to do it more sustainably. So, for instance, we try to have more sustainable packaging, and we mind our cars, our paper, our waste, and we try to make more sustainable our supply chain. But now there's a new shift, and this is crucial for the future, I'll tell you. It's not only anymore about the way you go about producing the products or the services, so the process itself, it's about the product and the service itself. Because imagine what I said earlier about obesity. Do you really think that in the future we need a company that produces, for instance, on its whole portfolio, 70% high sugar holding drinks? Do you think so? Or sweets for that matter? Or do we need a company that produces only fossil energy? Do we really want to applaud Coca-Cola, for instance, because they have this great sustainable initiative to bring cola with bikers in the woods in Africa? No, of course not, because we don't want that stuff there at all. So there's a big shift. Because by now we know that, if talking about food, we need nutritious, healthy food. And we don't want high sugar holding, high fat holding, bad stuff with no nutritional value anymore. We want energy that helps the world. We don't want forms of energy that cause more climate change. And thus, this sentence I made together with Paul Polman when he was in charge of Unilever, and we said, okay, we'll decide. Our opinion is that if products do not add value or have purpose towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, in other words, if products don't have a positive impact on people in the world, they should cease to exist. Anything else is too complex. Just stop that. You should be a company that helps the world and not causes more troubles. And boy, does that mean a shift. And companies that embrace this thought are the companies of the future. Because they're here to stay. Because by now there's been proven a couple of things. One, next generations embrace sustainability and feel much more connected with purpose than the former generation. We'll get back to that in a minute. Two, it's proven that companies that really embrace sustainability are far more innovative than others because they continuously have to find new ways, new solutions. So it actually feeds the innovation process. So the competitive advantage that companies can generate is higher than the ones that don't aim for purpose. It's much easier to find and to retain good employees and leaders, because more and more people want to work for a company with a purpose and don't want to work anymore for a company that doesn't have a purpose. They can't feel proud to work there. People want to feel committed to the goal of the organization. Last but not least, companies that do this generate great branding and high quality branding and lasting branding. So for instance, this company here, Interface, whom you possibly have heard of. Who doesn't know Interface as a company? Okay, it's a very boring company to begin with, because it was a company that produced carpet tiles. I mean, you can't think of possibly, and probably they're around here as well, because you can put them in and you can take them out, of course, but they made carpet tiles. Really, really boring. And really, really bad in terms of oil production, pollution, etc. And then Interface says, no, we don't want to be part of the problem anymore, so we'll decide we have a mission zero. This is the thing, if you talk about leadership and if you talk about HR and the impact on this topic and relationship with leadership, it's a leadership style which needs bold decisions, not a little bit there, not a little bit there, a clear decision and a clear target. So Interface said, mission zero, we don't want to have any negative impacts anymore in terms of CO2 and use of resources. So they became a circular company. And I'm telling this really easily. Of course, that was a very difficult thing to achieve, because they couldn't use raw materials anymore, but had to recycle their own carpets, but also had to buy all kinds of garbage, so to say, to see if they could make carpet of it. Otherwise, the company can't grow anymore, of course. And they noticed that because they said mission zero, everybody knew what to do. If you were working in innovation, if you were working in HR, if you were the CEO, doesn't matter. It was such a clear objective that all the energy went, and they actually achieved it earlier than they thought they would, because it was 2020 that they actually wanted it done, and it was achieved, I think, 2016 or 17. And then they said, okay, but now actually nobody could care less if Interface is there or not. Besides the fact that investors make money of it and people have a job, etc. But the company in itself doesn't have a meaning. We want to take it one step further. We want to have a positive impact on the world. Actually, the more Interface grows, and Interface is an example, but it's a very clear one, that's why I spent some time on it. If our company grows, it should be good for the world. Because then everybody wants our company to grow. It makes total sense, doesn't it? Because we have a positive impact on the world. And that's where they started their project Climate Takeback. And they said, you know, carbon is a great problem in the world. Why don't we try to be part of that solution? And so they started their research process to make granules from CO2 and have it in a chemical process, and then it's an ingredient actually for their company. So they take away the mess, so to say, the CO2. And to do that, they changed their culture from making it from your enemy, your friend. Something we try to fight against, but now we embrace it and we said, no, it's there and we're going to make a solution for it. And that gave so much inspiration in the company, and I don't have to tell you that they won a lot of awards for it throughout the world. And they were very praised because of it. Everybody wants to work at that company. And it's doing really, really well. And this is a listed company. So the fact that a lot of people say, oh, can't do it because it's a listed company, that is not true, because this is a listed company and it does really well. And so if you think about HR and the future and what it will change for work, it means that companies on a larger scale will repurpose and will try to be a positive impact on the world. And I think from your profession, you can be of great, great meaning of it. In a lot of companies, I see the HR department, and then I see business development, And that's totally separate. And it shouldn't be. Because you're about the people. And actually, there's nothing more in a company than the people. You know, it's the people that have to do it. And I, for one, am a great ambassador for having a threesome in the boardroom, the CEO, the CFO, and the chief HR. It should be a threesome, nothing less. So other companies do this, and I can share a lot of examples, and there's actually 50 cases in the book you can get after my keynote in the back. But this is another company that did it, and I want to share with you because this company actually had to reinvent itself twice because it was a coal mine to begin with. I mean, there's nothing worse than that. And it reinvented itself into a chemical company, and now it reinvented itself into a life science and food company with only positive impact solutions. The purpose of this company is to improve lives and health. Who would have thought that, huh? 10 years ago, that companies have the courage to really mention it at the core of their company. And I was thinking, if you think about HR, then what should be the core of HR? That will be amazing to think about how can your profession be totally on purpose, because that's what it's all about. And DSM has said we have two things. We have People Plus, and of course I make it very, very simple because they have zillion of reports and they make it much more complex than I tell it to you now. But you know, in order to understand things, it's good to simplify them. They have two lines, People Plus and Planet Plus. And everything in their organization has to have a plus on both. So if they invent something for food, then they have to prove, okay, it's better for people to use this than other things that already are in the market. And they really saw that through, totally, throughout the whole organization. What you also see with companies like this, that they collaborate with NGOs in a totally different way than before, and that collaboration and networking becomes a totally different thing because you cannot do this by yourself. With such big ambitions, you cannot do it. And it means a totally different leadership style because you have to enable people in companies to network outside the organization. You have to enable them to network with crazy startups sometimes who have a solution, because a big tanker as a multinational cannot come to this kind of innovative solutions by itself. It needs to find them in the marketplace. You need to enable to let people work together, but in a non-hierarchical way. And let that be that is also what people want in the future. You know, people don't want hierarchy anymore. They want to be able to network. They want their freedom and they want purpose. And that's what you have to do. Now, I'm not going to give you more numbers or very boring numbers, but this is something to really, you must know. If you think, okay, all these sustainable companies, that is nice, that is interesting, but this will not be the majority because, you know, you have so many big companies that are still in fossil energy or conservative production or whatever. Realize that by now, we haven't put a price on most things that humans create or use. So we still haven't got a real price on carbon. We don't have a real good price on resources or pollution for that matter. But imagine that if we internalize these costs, if we put a price on it, and there's a lot of organizations throughout the world that actually want that, through pricing, through costs, many organizations strive to achieve this change. Also in politics, the shift from tax on labor, which is actually ridiculous, to tax on resources and pollution, which makes much more sense. I mean, you want more labor and you're going to put tax on it, and you want less pollution and use of resources, and no, don't put tax on it. So it's a really strange mechanism and should shift. But suppose we do that, then for one, we win 13% of our global GDP. This is, what you see here in the slide, represents 13% of global GDP. Of course, we'll have winners and losers when this happens. The sustainable companies will be the winners because they don't have so much cost to internalize to begin with. And there's been extensive research by the Global Business Commission, and they found that the average sustainable business case, once we put a price on resources and pollution, will improve with almost 50%. Almost 50%. And business cases that fight food waste will improve with more than 90%. So you see, that shift will happen. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. And you got a role to play in there. Now, it's also a generational thing. I mean, probably we have some baby boomers and most of Generation X here in the house. Who's a millennial? Oh, we have a lot of millennials. Well, our hope is on you. A lot of research has proven that millennials and the younger people they don't want to be put up with the disasters the generations before them actually created, because they weren't a part of it. They weren't a part of the globalization and the way we produced our goods and transported them throughout the world. 66% of those millennials, or 61, sorry, is prepared to pay a higher price for sustainable goods than non-sustainable ones, already at this moment. And imagine that a few years ago we were talking, people don't want to pay more for biological food, for instance, because it's too expensive. Yeah, mind you, all the costs are not internalized. Of course it's more expensive. We should know why that is. But by now that has changed. People become more and more aware of the things I sketched in the beginning of my speech. What is happening throughout the world. They don't want that anymore. They want it to change, and they want to be part of it, and they don't want the bad things to be stimulated by their own consumer behavior. 8 out of 10 millennials is aware of the problems in the world and wants to work for a purpose-driven company, and is willing, big part of them is already willing to pay more for sustainable products. So this is a huge market, and this is a huge movement, and it will go quicker and quicker, and will grow tremendously more. So realize that if you're in HR, that millennials want a different thing. And actually we should embrace that. I mean, they're not ideal, of course, no generation is ideal. But they are so willing to help your company to become sustainable and to repurpose and to do good for the world. And doing good is doing well in terms of business and results. That's already proven. And you should be aware of the leadership structure and the style and the way you care about people and the way you stimulate leadership development, for instance, that this is crucial. I see so many companies, and then the CEO says all kinds of great things about sustainability. And I go out of his room, and I go and look for people that could be important in this, and they never even spoke about it with him. Because then out of his door, there's the total hierarchy of the company, and there's so many layers, and there's so many structures, and the real people that want to drive change and that want to be purpose-orientated, I mean, they can't even talk to him. Change that. It's so important. Because purpose-led companies are future companies. It's going to be the majority. I hope it's going to be the common and not the rare in the near future. And there's every reason to believe that. Now, today and the other days here and everywhere in the press and everywhere, you read a lot about tech, high tech, digitalization, robots, artificial intelligence, etc., etc., etc. And it's the greatest thing. We have this progress in tech, and we can do so many great things. But it's important, at least that's my opinion and my view, that we do something good with all that technique and all these solutions and intelligence, that we use our tech for good and not for something else. Because if we do that, we can solve just about everything. But if it's tech on the one hand and other people care about the planet, we're not going to get there. It's really going to be connected. So the best thing for companies is to become purpose-orientated, to repurpose, but also to embrace technology. Even if you're not a tech company, every sector, and I describe that in my book, every single sector should embrace technology. If you're building houses, you should embrace technology because it can bring us positive impact houses with lots of solutions, with everything recycled, but also with tech to be much more comfortable in houses. If you are working in a municipality and you're responsible for the water system, we use tech because we can detect where we lose water, we can dose the amount of water, we can recycle water. Everything needs tech solutions. And throughout the world, there are so many inspirational startups, and also here in Germany, that have a great positive impact. And if we would scale up solutions like that, if companies embrace, and again, as HR, you play an important role in that, embrace solutions that are just fresh from the drawing board, with no history whatsoever, and that just aim for a positive impact, that would be great. I told you the huge problem of food waste and loss. Now, here in the West, we're responsible for the food waste ourselves, more or less. You know, we throw away too much, because we want to buy too much, and because we want to put stickers on it that, you know, by a certain date you must have bought it, and otherwise it just goes away, and it doesn't always go to the food service for the poor, unfortunately. But there's an example of an app that warns smallholder farmers that have no intention of losing anything or wasting everything, but they're just having a poor small farm, and then storms and climate and all those things make their harvest go to loss. And this is a very simple app. It's just an example that warns those smallholder farmers right away who have their mobile phones by now what the weather change will be, and they can take measures, and this reduces the food loss of those farmers immensely. Great example of tech for good. This is another small company, and I have many, many more in the book. African-born 3D printing. We can do 3D printing, but you know, it makes total sense if we have our oceans that by 2050, if we don't change our behavior, we'll have more plastic than fish in the sea. To get rid of the mess, not only not adding any plastic anymore, but taking it away. And mind you, we only recycle 5% of the plastic, no more. So don't believe all the heroic stories, it's still a little. Nevertheless, in Africa they found that they can use waste, because there's a lot of poor people who collect waste for just a few pennies. They collect it and they use it in a 3D printer, and they make devices for people, for instance, that they absolutely need to be able to walk better. So, really necessary things by 3D printing. Isn't that amazing that we can use technique for life-improving changes in such a simple way, and we have access to all that technique, big data, small data. Here in Germany was a Prosolver technique developed. It's a facing of buildings and houses, it can be used everywhere, that actually absorbs the smog from the air. And there's one amazing example, you can look it up, it's called La Torre de las Especialidades. It's in Mexico City, and it's the facing of a hospital. And that absorbs up to the pollution of 6,000 cars per day. And it's a beautiful facing. There's no reason not to do that. We can be innovative, we can use all our techniques and be improvement for the world at the same time. If you talk about leadership, if you want to be a purpose-driven company, and if you want to be a leader of that kind of company, it is very impactful in your leadership style, of course, but also what leadership means. Because before, if you were a leader of a company, you took care of your own company. And then maybe you were responsible for some suppliers and then the other side of the supply chain to your customer. And that's about it. But in this case, you want to influence all your suppliers throughout your whole supply chain. But not only that, you want to influence your sector. Because, for instance, you want there to be a price on carbon, or if you want there to be a food collaboration throughout the sector to achieve some things which you cannot achieve by yourself because it's such huge challenges. And not only that, you don't only want to be responsible for your sector, but you also want to be part of solutions like these Sustainable Development Goals. So you also have a global role to play. And this is not only for huge companies. We have, like, for instance, at the World Economic Forum, we have global shapers, global leaders, and those are of smaller companies. So everybody can play its part. So if you really want to, and we call this, at the United Nations, we call it SDG leadership, so leadership orientated to lead companies that have a positive impact on the targets of the world, is something that happens mostly outside your company walls. So you need to be able to do totally different things. So, for instance, before, you didn't need political skills, for instance. But if you want to be a SDG leader, that is important. You must be able to talk to politics. It wasn't that important that you have the capability to be vulnerable, for instance, because, you could make sure that you knew it all. But in this case, that's impossible, because the more answers you have, the more questions you'll get. So you have to be able to be confident by being vulnerable and not knowing. So it's an open leadership style. It's not hierarchical. It's not I'm the boss and I tell you. That's not it anymore. Totally different style of leadership. I could talk about hours about it, but I can't. But you can read up on it. And so we came to 5 qualities of the leader of a purpose-driven organization called an SDG leader. And I'll take you through them briefly. 1, it means making a bold decision and accepting and stimulating that is a part, or maybe the core, I would rather have that they put there, the core of the company's strategy. It's purposed first. First, I do with my company something that's good for the world. And then you need to be able to willing to have exceeding ambition levels. It's quite complicated how they phrase it here, from end-to-end operation. So an ambition level for the whole bloody supply chain, regardless what it contains. So imagine, I gave you an example of Interface that had their mission 0 and then climate take back, 1 decision, 1 target, done. I don't know if you saw it on Twitter. There was this remark of Alan Joop, the new CEO of Unilever, and he twittered that the mission of Unilever to be carbon neutral by 2020 is actually achieved. I mean, that is amazing. Imagine the impact. And now they have to go beyond, of course. By the way, it's nice to know that Alan Joop recently said in an interview, the only brands and the only companies I'm going to add to the Unilever portfolio are purpose-driven brands. Like, for instance, the vegetarian butcher they bought a while ago. Because he said, of course, it's a moral thing, and I'm convinced I have to do that, like his predecessor Paul Polman did. But yet, it's just mere business sense. Because by now, and given the fact that the millennials will stir this up only, sustainable brands grow 5 times faster than non-sustainable brands by now. 5 times. I would be crazy to buy non-sustainable brands because it's a declining market and this is the growth market. And at the same time, they're evaluating their portfolio now, finally, I must say, because they have quite some products and you must be aware of the contents and the packaging of certain ice creams, starting with an M and ending with an M, the big ones, that's also their products. And they're reassessing to toss them out or they have to repurpose. This has never happened before. Change or disappear. And that's what's happening more. And that's the kind of leadership you need for that. And the third one is important for you. Support for the SDGs across functionalized and external communications. So SDG leadership means that you'll have it as a leading principle throughout the entire company, throughout the entire supply chain, and that you're willing and able to use it honestly in all your communications. And this is a no-brainer. Still, often it doesn't happen. And like I said before, you have to be able to collaborate and be willing to collaborate with all kinds of out-of-the-picture parties like NGOs or Interface, for instance. They collaborated with the zoo in London because they started to make carpets from fishing nets. So they needed knowledge about fishing, and they didn't have that, of course, so they went to the zoological zoo in London, for instance. So weird kind of things, but which is very inspirational. And last but not least, and this is the most difficult one, you must be able and willing to disclose your information, to be transparent, and that you're going to measure honestly and completely. So there's a lot to do about integrated reporting, for instance. So before you only had, besides the normal annual report, you had the social reports. Now you have the sustainability reports, but the integrated reporting, this is the best form, of course, and you must be able to want to know what your footprint is. So not only having the green window, you know, with all the nice projects, but also be clear, okay, we still have damage, and this is so much, and it's in that part of the supply chain, and then you are able to solve it. I think it's exciting, you know, if you look at what is happening, and I started out maybe a bit depressing to give you some numbers of the world, but if you see how innovative we can be and how much more sense it makes that if you build a wall next to a road because you don't want noise to pass, that it's ridiculous to build that thing for only one thing. That we can grow green on it, so that we can restore the air, that we can create energy with it, so everything can have multiple functions. It makes so much more sense. And please get educated on this topic. If you want to be meaningful in the future, and no doubt you want to be, you need to educate yourself on this and find your own authenticity in this topic and see what you find important in a company you want to work to begin with, but in a company you work for, how you can contribute in your role. There's many inspirational people here. You see an overview of SDG pioneers. There's many things to learn from and to get inspiration from. If you really like this topic and you want to read more about it, we have books. And Sina, she went to my car and she couldn't find it first, but apparently it's a thumbs up, so she found my car. We have books at the bookstore, I believe, if you like, and I'll stay there for a little while. Besides answering your questions here, you please feel free to come up to me and share your thoughts. If you want to read other articles, just look at margahoek.com, and you'll find on press, you'll find a wide range of articles to read and links, etc., etc. I hope it was useful for you. Thanks for your inspiration. And back to you.
Thank you, Marga Hoek. Thank you very much. So do we have any questions? Wer hat eine Frage? Da ging ein Finger leicht hoch. Nein? Okay.
Here in the front.
Please.
We talked a lot about the goals for companies, and as we know, our system is still organized the way that you have some economic focus mostly. How do you think, what is the role of politics in all this in order to set the right incentives for companies to also not just find this moral to do, but maybe economical? Because you talked about it is economic in a long sense, but how can we make it faster, maybe from a political point of view?
We need politics desperately. We cannot do from business, we cannot do everything. Or at least it will take much longer. So what we need for politics is that they collaborate at the European Union, which is already a difficult thing, but globally, more importantly, to set a price on carbon, one. If the price is put on there, I showed you how much faster things go. Two, to have rules and regulations. I mean, it shouldn't be legal anymore to pump up oil and gas from the ground, whereas there's other ways to go about it, or at least do it without any penalties. We should put policy on recycling. I mean, I mentioned that we have 5% recycling of plastic. That's insane, you know? That's really insane. So we need policy for that says, okay, today, at least your product must have 30% recycled. Then after a few years, 50, 70, and so forth. So that we need. We need courageous politicians, and we have them even fewer than we have courageous business leaders. So yes, to answer to your question, very important for policy, rules, regulation, and tax. So if you want to achieve that, join politics, because we have very little people striving for that still.
You told me before that for you, Macron is one of the biggest sustainable leaders. Why?
Well, you asked me, mention a leader that has done something which is significant. And of course, Macron is now occupied with something other in the color of your dress. But in the beginning, I noticed that he was really trying to gather politics and to gather the business leader and starting a green investment fund at a large scale, much larger than just business could achieve. And he really did that, and he understood how things work. So he launched that at World Economic Forum. And they had the ambition to make Paris the greenest finance center of the world. And that is an example of an ambition in politics that we need.
Other questions? Yes. Strike. Strike, I say.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I would like to buy your book, but that's not why I got the microphone.
No.
So you were talking a lot about companies that are producing companies, like Unilever, for example, that have to look at the footprint. So let's take other companies that maybe are IT companies, not with huge server farms, but something like this. They work with brain workers, with ideas, with technology. We have an approach that we allow or we enable them to help by drinking coffee. And this pays into the SDG 2 and 4, meaning education and food. And so it's an element, for example, that anyone can use very quickly and doesn't need to have a huge shift or strategy behind it. Do you say that's also a good way for companies to get started into the SDGs?
Of course, you know, it's something you have to begin, and every single thing is important as long as it contributes. Because if we all imagine that we all are having heading up a startup in something, and we all tomorrow act and have positive impact, then it's a big thing. You know, then it's like many big things that are an inspiration that can grow into bigger things. Everything matters. I think that is an important thing. And you know, it's often the simple things that help and that inspire. And talking about coffee, now you're inspiring me. There are thrilling coffee companies that think about, isn't it strange that the coffee is being grown in South America, for instance, by smallholder farmers, the same that needed the app, remember? And then we take it from them, and then here in the rich world we burn the coffee. So all the economic benefits is here and not there. So if you have even a tiny company, if you change that principle and that becomes an example, then many others can follow it. So go on.
Anybody else? Please, over there.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking about lobbying. What do you think about that? Like, I mean, there are still so many people out there, or few people, but the only idea and only goal they have is to make more money, and they might have a lot of influence also on politics.
Oh, absolutely.
And stuff like that. So this is something that frightens me, because I'm like, okay, there are so many good people out there, but there are so few people who have so much force and so much influence, can influence so much, you know, and they not for good.
I know. I've been lobbying for years, actually. I was the chair of the Dutch Sustainable Business Association, and I lobbied on behalf of only 250 companies, whereas, you know, the conservative employers organization had like many thousands of companies, so we were small relatively, but still. And it's tough because imagine that we had like 3 lobbyists with 250 companies, and if you're the energy sector or cement sector or whatever, you have like 10, 20, 30 times as much budget for lobbying, and they spend it. So it's easy for them to be more powerful. What I did find is that as a lobbyist you grow by the facts. You're very clear of the facts, you know your facts, and you say, well, this is how much you produce, this is the impact you have, this is the price on it, this is what we suggest, this is the impact. You know, if you go about it quite economically and you're politically sensitive, then you can actually be very influential. So it's not that you have no influence because the other have so much money, because you have to be more inventive, more creative, and then you can have that influence. And don't forget, I don't know if you are in the lobbying scene yourself or not, no? But don't forget, if you are in the lobbying scene, you're lobbying for the right side of history. You're lobbying for the good cause that will be more and more important. So I noticed that the further you come as a lobbyist, the worse it's almost sometimes like a war, you know, the negotiation goes, because the other ones have to fight really, really hard to maintain what they have. They don't want change. They resist the change, of course. And also I noticed that the companies that try to prevent change, like for instance Shell, a big energy company in the Netherlands, they now wise up. Don't forget they wise up because they know, okay, I can have all these assets under the ground, but everybody knows that between 60 and 80% will not be taken out of the ground anymore. And they know they have to shift. They recently tried to buy, it's not final yet, tried to buy the biggest sustainable energy company in the Netherlands, for instance. They start to wise up. So the lobbying gets easier and easier. Answer to your question?
Okay.
Good questions, by the way.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was
You're
amazing.
welcome.
Yes.
I will be there for anybody who has additional questions.
Ja, herzlichen Applaus nochmal. Dankeschön.